Hey everybody, this is Sheets, and I'm going to be going over the Tour Championship breakdown. Um, so what I'm going to be doing is hopefully, yes, I'm going to give you who I like on the slate, but I want to talk about uh, how I like to analyze projections and how I like to analyze projections as a function of ownership. And hopefully you guys will get something out of this. It's just aside from what I like in this particular event. This event is a little bit bizarre. Number one, it's only got 30 golfers. Number two, the way that they're scoring this, they're giving some golfers, golfers are starting with with 2-stroke leads, 5-stroke leads, or whatever. So they're starting the tournament off with finishing positions, right? Like if you're in first right off the bat, you're assigned your finishing position points, and these golfers are priced accordingly. So what this is going to resemble is essentially a round 4 showdown slate, for those of you who are familiar with that. And you get these guys that are given these points, and it's incumbent upon the rest of the field to kind of catch up and steal those position points away from them. And that is the push and pull. Do you want to play with the safety of the guys that are already given those finishing points, or do you want to go for, or do you believe that some of these guys that are outside the money will go past these guys and basically, steal their finishing points? So if you have, say, Daniel Berger, and you go past Patrick Cantlay, you're going to not only get the finishing position points, but Cantlay, who had been given the finishing position points at the beginning, will have lost them. So you get kind of double leverage by taking that type of risk. And what you'll find when you do these slates from a point per dollar perspective is that the lower priced golfers are usually rated as the best values for exactly that reason, because they do have that type of leverage, to get fantasy points. And not only that, but you get good correlation with them in that if they are going to try to get finishing position points, it's because they will have gotten good birdie and, an eagle points as well. So that's why when you look at my sheets, you look at everybody's sheets for this week, if you rank them by any value-based metric, you're going to find that the cheaper golfers just rate the best on a point per dollar basis. Now, again, that doesn't mean you only play them, because you do have that finishing position safety of the guys that are at 12K, 13K, or whatever it is. But that's the first thing I wanted to mention. So what I'm going to do is rather than just kind of go down this list, like that, and just kind of just talk forever about all these different golfers, I want to cut right to it. This is something I've tried to avoid doing over the last couple of months since we went premium, and that would be kind of showing you the sheets that I use to make these value rankings, because I want to show you them for this particular slate, because I want to kind of show you the way I analyze them. So remember, you have 30 golfers and there are only 6 spots. So it's going to be very likely that there's a whole bunch of duped lineups. And the way that golf works, there's quite a bit of variance in it, and you really want to avoid playing chalk golfers, especially in situations like this. So this is what I like to do. So here is basically the list kind of ranked by, well, let's look at it this way. Here's the rankings based on actual projected fantasy points. You can look at it this way. And no surprise, the guys that have the highest salary rate to be the highest. And you can rate these by point per dollar, in which case, as I mentioned, these cheaper guys are going to end up being, just a better point per dollar plays. And then by Sheets value score, which kind of mixes the two. And even still, the cheaper price guy is going to rate highest with respect to value scores. Now, when you put these in an optimizer, though, you can't just, if you play the top, for example, the top 6 value scores, I'll just show you, like, you'll end up getting very few fantasy points, right? Like, you'll end up getting 2 through 7, 399 fantasy points, where if you play the top 6, raw points guys, you get 530. And obviously you can't play the top 6 raw points guy, which is what makes this kind of fun. In any case, reason why I want to put it to you in this way is that I'm ranking these guys by Sheets value score. And no matter how you rank them, whether it be by points per dollar or fantasy points, you want to compare guys that are in the same kind of boat with respect to ownership. Like, for example, you rate these guys by Sheets value score, and you have 2 guys that are similar priced, that being Billy Horschel and Erik van Rooyen. Both have very similar value scores, and yet Billy Horschel is projected to have almost 1/2 of the ownership, just slightly more than 1/2 of the ownership as Erik van Rooyen, which means is that Billy Horschel becomes an extremely strong play, especially relative to Erik van Rooyen. You know, and likewise, you'll see Sergio Garcia, part of the same price range, who projects by Sheets value score, for example, to be very similar, yet is carrying a higher ownership than both these guys. So Billy Horschel, of these 3 kind of like-minded, not like-minded, you know, they look the same as with respect to price and value score, is significantly better play. Now, the next guy I want to look at are these next 2, that being Patrick Reed and Stuart Sink. So that was well, let's look at Neiman also. So Neiman, again, he's very similar to Sergio Garcia. He rates lower than Horschel, for example, however, has twice the ownership. So I would play Horschel literally all day long. Now, you look at these next 2, that being Reed and Stuart Sink. So these guys rate a little bit, well, a little bit or a lot of it. They rate a little bit lower than these guys, okay? But the question is how much, how do I put this? They're getting about half the ownership of these 3 dudes, Van Rooyen, Garcia, and Neiman. How much worse or how close does the Reed and Sink projection have to be based on Sheets value score to overcome that, you know, to let you give up those projections, right, in the name of ownership? And the answer is it's really, really tough to say. I'm sorry, but you do this enough times, you kind of get a feel for it. And for me, the way I look at these numbers, I think it's probably a theoretical draw. Maybe Sink and Reed might be a little bit better than Van Rooyen, Garcia, and Neiman when you factor in the ownership. But it is pretty close because, look, let's face it, they do project to be a little bit worse. And that's in part why they're going to be lower owned. But there's other reasons why Patrick Reed and Stuart Sink are going to be lower owned, aside from just the normal projection models. One of them being that Patrick Reed is just coming out of the hospital and he missed the last, the last playoffs. And so people are probably going to be unwilling to play him for that reason. If you're willing to overcome that narrative, you're getting probably an artificially low-owned Patrick Reed. However, his projection is also kind of, his projection does not factor in the hospital thing. So it's not as if, you could give him a projection bump as well. Stuart Sink, he is another guy that people don't want to play because he's viewed as old. But it's not artificially low ownership because his projection is low. So I think that Reed and Sink are very similar to the Van Rooyen, Garcia, and Neiman, but with Horschel clearly being so far the top option. Let's compare some other guys. So let's look at, for example, Berger. Berger rates to be the best play, and it's by a decent amount. However, he's owned accordingly. What I like to do, instead of saying, boy, he's too highly owned, I want to compare him to other guys that look the same. So if you go to this other 5,700 guy like Reed, I mean, he's significantly worse and 1/3 the ownership. So I do think that Berger's probably, I would say, almost on par with these other guys. I mean, for me, if I were to look at these top dudes, I would say the Horschel would be the clear standout. And then all these other guys, given ownership and everything, it'd be somewhat similar. Now, look at these guys. All these guys are in the 6K range and rate to be, you know, very similarly similar with respect to value, that being Connor, Scheffler, and Hideki, and they're all 20% owned. But what you can do if you want, if you could go to Kevin Na, who is going to be 8% owned, who is not exactly on par with these three, but he's within striking distance at least, such that I feel as though, you know, less than half the ownership is probably at least puts them on par. Now, obviously, as you might imagine, I do regard Scheffler, Connors, and Matsuyama as being very similar. They're similarly owned and similarly rated. This is the interesting one. So you have Sungjae Im at 7,300 at 23% ownership. This to me is a full fade. Okay, like you have all of these guys in kind of similar price ranges. Like look at Kokrak, for example. You have Kokrak and Im are very similarly priced. I mean, they're close. And Kokrak is rated a little bit higher, and he is one half of the ownership. So like Sungjae Im would be a colossal fade for me. Now let's go down to Koepka, who, oh, by the way, always projects like crap. All right. So you'll have Oosthuizen. To me, this is like, again, somewhat easy. Oosthuizen and Koepka are rated the same as far as ownership goes, but Oosthuizen is significantly higher. So I would play Oosthuizen over Koepka. Now you have to look at all of these guys very similarly. These top guys over 10K. Now these guys, by the way, English, Burns. I mean, these guys to me are just kind of fades. I mean, why would I play these guys down here when I could play? Well, Hovland's kind of higher owned. Maybe they're not full fades. Okay. Because again, we want to compare apples to apples. We don't want to compare like English to, say, Daniel Berger, because Berger's a lower price. He's probably going to have, supposed to be a better play. But let's look at these top guys, because you are going to play these guys, right? You don't want to just play value. You want to get some raw points. How do you separate these guys? Well, given everything that we said, all right, to me, it's really, really easy. To me, you have Bryson being a complete fade. Okay. And if it's not a complete fade, he's at least, well, let's put, I mean, all these guys. So what I mean is DeChambeau, Thomas, Finau, like these guys all are down here, but compare these to Cam Smith and Jordan Spieth and even Dustin Johnson. I think these guys are significantly better given their ownership. Okay. Now Rahm at 13K, you know, he's going to be a strong raw points play. If you look, he like rates that like 7 higher fantasy points than pretty much anybody else. He's 33% owned. I think that that's fair. I wouldn't fade it, but I wouldn't go out of my way to lock it in. But I think that one decision you could make, and this is kind of ugly, right, is to play speed. Especially over DeChambeau. And you could play Spieth over DJ. You could play Spieth over JT. Okay. So that's the way I kind of look at it. And with that, in that respect, it does help hand build. You know, you could just pick, you know, hand build lineups using this exact process. And it doesn't take me to recap which guys I think you should be able to play given that type of analysis. Now, the other thing though, what you can do with these sheets is use SaberSim to help build them for you. Now I'm going to build a sample lineup build to kind of show you how to do that. Now, I'm going to do this right from scratch. First thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go to Saber Sim. We're going to go DraftKings. We're going to pick PGA Tour. And the first thing we have to do is upload our projections. Now, I have my own file, but you could download these from TrueDFS if you're a premium member. And I would set all other players at 0. And you'll see it replace the projections and ownership with my own. So what I'll do is I'll build, say, let's say I'll build 20 lineups. What I'd like to do is give myself some ownership fade because I think it's very important. Now, with respect to smart diversity, that kind of accounts for randomness. And I feel as though you want to put your smart diversity kind of high with a 30-person event. So I'll keep my ownership fade high and I'll keep my smart diversity high. And what we're doing here is creating lineups for MME type contests. We're not creating at this point single entry builds. I'll do that as well, but just to show you what this will do. Let's build, say, 50 lineups. And let's see what type of stuff it kind of comes up with when we give ourselves some ownership fade and also give ourselves some randomness. As that's going on. Should I pause you guys? No, it's almost done. So as an example, we'll see with this build. This actually built me 100% ramen burger. So, you know, that's what makes this fun. You know, do you have to fade these high owned guys, or does the optimizer just get them for you, even when you put ownership fade into your equation? You know, and this one actually rates DeChambeau as being the top, you know, part of the top lineup. So it's really up to you, you know, how you build, whether you use Saber Sim or the optimizers or you hand build. But I do think it's really important to consider at least ownership when you do that. For me, for this week, Billy Horschel is, you know, he's going to be in my hand built one, that's for sure. And I have to see what I want to do with respect to respecting the Saber Sim build or just replacing it with some of my own. But it's going to be a fun tournament. Hopefully this information was presented to you in a kind of a different way. Hopefully it helps you do well this week and in the future, which is probably more important. That's it. Have a good week.